Yeah. Okay. Yes, Paul and Sam are here. And then David is hoping to join. He had a doctor's appointment and he said he'd join as soon as he could. So
Okay, I think I saw that. Okay, great.
all that I heard from. So, so Peter, we had a very fruitful conversation with Sydney, and I've forgotten his last name, of CCH of Northern California.
Sheldon. Yeah, I think
Sydney.
it was Sheldon. Yeah.
And we had a lot of questions for him. We're trying to talk to a lot of different developers, and we had a lot of questions for him. And he was very patient, and he was took time to, because he would talk in jargon and lots of letters. And he was very patient whenever I would say, wait, those were letters again, what were those? And he would explain us how the process went, generally speaking. And so we're not done talking with developers, but we did, our minds are spinning, because one of the initial things is to select a developer and to enter into a letter of intent, right? And I know that you've dealt with this many times, and I had sent you that letter that Don Stump had sent me last year. And so there were so many things we were like, well, what about this? And he'd say, well, that's going to be in your letter of intent. Well, what about that? Well, that would be in your letter of intent. So we're like, this letter of intent is hugely important. And we said, Peter will know a lot about that, but not only that, he will know at what point we really need to work with a lawyer to draft such a thing, or and what kind of things we need to put in to make sure that we're responsible to the district and the conference, those kind of things. So that's kind of an introduction. And I don't know if you want to jump in or if you want to have specific questions from people, but really this time is for you to really inform us, and I will let you guide us on how best to do that.
Sure. So there are sort of several considerations that we'll just sort of let them tumble through as we go through in the thinking. The first of them is really, we need to not just enter into a letter of intent with a single entity without having gone through some sort of selection process.
Right.
And so now I would say what you've gone through at the moment is the exploratory. There is a there, at least with at least one potential developer.
Yes.
And so now it's a question of really being able to demonstrate to church location and building and to the cabinet that you've done, you're stewarding the property as wisely as you can for the ministry of the church. And we've been through the discussions already, so there's not a question where anyone's going to suddenly jump up and down on you and say, no, you've gone down the wrong path, you can't do that. So we've gone through that a large degree. And I know that with the one you've been talking with, the church development group, they are effectively offering a highest and best use of the land, because that's one of the things that you're going to need to look at, is what would be, if you threw away all the desires to have low-income housing, all of that other stuff, what would be the free market price of that land? Because again, as we've discussed, I don't know how much I'm sort of going back over old ground, but to a certain extent, anything you choose to do that reduces the value from a full free market value is essentially you're choosing to spend ministry funds to do that. So if you could sell it for $1 million and you instead get $500,000 for the low-income housing, what you're effectively doing is saying, okay, we as a church are choosing to use $500,000 of our resources in order to provide low-income housing. That's not an invalid choice. No one's going to say to you, you shouldn't be doing that. But it just needs to be an affirmative choice rather than a sense of saying, oh, we have this sort of warm, fuzzy desire to provide low-income housing, and here's the price for low-income housing. as I say, looking at the, when we were looking at this previously, it was likely that you would get a higher value out of the land from going with the developer than you would by just trying to sell it free and clear because of the number of restrictions. And I know there are a lot of issues. I think it was the California tiger salamanders or something like that, which were challenging on that property. And so these are now the next level of discussions we need to have in terms of discovery, is how it's really serving the ministry of the church. And again, as I say, I'm not bringing these questions up out of any sense of cynicism or distrust or dislike. It's just, we're now at that point of the due diligence. Beyond that, what they're proposing is not unreasonable. It's a fairly normal sort of development. I'm sure they've been throwing around, as you say, lots of letters and initials and things like that. What I would really, as I say, there's nothing unusual about that. It's a question then of how we convert that into, getting a proposal from them plus others. Do you put out a request for proposals? Do you put out a request for expression of interest? Napa, for example, who are just a little further forward than you in this process, put out a solicitation. They received expressions of interest from proposers, and they've entered into what's now called an exclusive negotiation agreement, an ENA period, which is essentially an agreement to try and reach an agreement. And that's not unusual, because if you were to put this out for proposals, you either take the proposal as written, okay, and we sign the contract. It's, offer and contract where we say, we think you're the right partner for us to work with. There's a lot of details to work out. We're going to go forward in good faith, talking only to you. We're not playing the field anymore. We're going directly with you in this exclusive negotiation period. And assuming we're going to reach an agreement, we will proceed. We're not going to just sort of talk to you for a year and then back out. So it's a serious commitment, but it's not a guarantee that the deal is going to suit everyone. So they may have come in and said, we think that you'll get this much ground rent, or you'll get this much capital value, and we'll be able to provide this many houses, and we'll be able to do all this, that, and the other. And then at the end of the year, we discover that just doesn't pencil out. It doesn't work. The salamanders have taken over or whatever. And so then, in good faith, if we don't get to a deal at the end, we all just say, thanks very much. We carry our own costs and we move on. So I don't know if those are the sorts of initials you're getting, but that would be really the next set of steps.
So those are some of the things. So I'm wondering, we were able to have a kind of this discovery conversation with CCH, and then Paul called several others, and he hasn't heard back from them. People that we talked with previously, as well as maybe one or two others, and nobody's returning his calls. So I'm wondering, should we put out a request for proposal? Would think that would be a way to get more people to respond? Like kind of cutting out a step, like come and talk to us, and then we'll see if we want a proposal. Should we just ask for a proposal, or what would you recommend? And just a minute too, Paul, are you taking some notes that you can type up for us?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Peter.
Yeah. So it usually is good to issue a specific request. You can do it either as a request for proposal, or a request for expression of interest, or whatever you want to call it, a request for qualifications.
Do you have templates for those kind of things? Or where would we find a template or something like
Yeah.
that?
We have some, and it would need to be tailored to what you've got, but it would be something where we could say, it's really a statement of what it is you're looking for. This is the point at which, again, I'm sort of bouncing around a little bit as the conversation's getting started here, that there's usually with these things, I sort of say there are 4 tiers: is what is essential, what is important, what is desirable, and what do I not care about?
Okay.
And those are really important as a group for you to start articulating. So if we're saying it is essential that you take the entire property, we don't want to be left with half a property. So even if you're only going to redevelop half of it, you have to take a ground lease of the entire facility. If we're saying we're not interested in selling the land, we only want to do a ground lease. Or if on the other hand, we say, well, selling would be okay. We'd like to have a ground lease, but selling is okay. That sort of moves from the essential into the important. If we're saying that it is essential that it is suiting low-income housing, and again, defining low-income as in, is it permanent supportive? Is it low income? Is it workforce? All of those things. And most of this is stuff you've already gone through.
Oh,
But it's
no, not really.
okay. But it's the sort of thing. Oh, sorry, I see you've got a hand up there. Oh no, that's my hand. Okay. For some reason, hovering over one of the users, it had a little hand shape on it. So it's now imagining for yourself, okay, we've gone through all this exploration. What do you want? And so collectively write down, and then doing your best to put it into these various buckets of, as I say, essential, important, desirable. And there's a big difference between important and desirable in the sense that you're saying, it's important that it's low income, but I really don't mind whether it's permanent supportive housing, workforce housing. So that could go into the, I really don't care. We just need it to be providing some justice. If we said that it's, it'd be nice if it were not more than 3 stories, but we really don't mind if it's 7, slowly bucketing these things. And the reason we have that 4th one is I really don't care, is actually a lot of times stuff bubbles up in the, oh, we really think it should be this. And then after you look at it a little bit, you say, I really don't actually mind. We don't have to say anything about what is required by law. So all of the environmental entitlements to deal with the salamanders, we don't have to say anything about that, because any developer is going to have to deal with it. So we may at the same time, to say it has to be code compliant, it has to be ADA accessible, is utterly immaterial. If we, on the other hand, said, we really want this housing to have accessible public open space, because we believe that it's not only a question about it being available for housing, but it needs to be a pleasant place to live, we may want to articulate that. So getting ready for the request for proposals or expressions of interest is really saying, we've been relatively clear about what we want. And then we can say, now we're inviting any developer to come in and tell us why you should be the one to be picked. And we would say that based on this, we're going to move into a process whereby, based on the proposals, we will enter into an exclusive negotiation period, usually 6 months to 12 months, because the developer that you select is then going to have to start spending some serious money.
Right.
Because they're going to need to be doing the surveys, finding out what would work there, putting together some sketches, most likely, And at the end of the exclusive negotiation agreement, you will then be signing a contract that says, I'm going to give you a 99-year lease on the land. You agree to pay me X dollars a year for, whatever. All of the very hard terms would get into that final contract. I don't think that the developer you've been talking to is doing anything inappropriate or underhanded. I imagine that they were hoping that they would have an inside track. They've been being nice to you, which is fine. And if we truly believed that they are the only one who want to give us an offer, we could skip the RFP process, but I suspect that people will want to say, at least give it one more shot. You've been doing these phone calls. No one's been answering your calls. But put the offer once, going for the last time. Here's your chance.
Right, because we really did want to talk to several developers. We didn't want to just pick one. We wanted, we wanted to have several developers, and so we've been a little bit disappointed that people didn't respond quickly. And but we weren't ready to throw in the towel yet. We were wanting to come back to it in June and see if we can't get some more developers. But how long do you think that part of why I'm asking about requests for proposal and stuff, I'm just wondering if they would respond better to an official something rather than just, will you have a conversation with us? So I was trying to get a feel for that, because I just don't know how long we would bump out if people really aren't going to get back to us on it. How long do we bump this out?
Right, because you'd probably, with a request for proposals, have to give them at least 90 days, right? So you'd be...
Not necessarily. Essentially what you're doing is, opposed to giving them a call and they don't have a deadline to get back to you. So it's always on I'll get around to it. This puts if deadline. You don't respond by X date, and if you wanted to put a shorter duration, with the 90 days, it just means they've got 85 days before they think about it. And so I don't think you'd want to do it in less than 30 days. A lot depends on how much you're asking for. And if there truly is no interest, then, they can turn you down in 30 days as easy as they can turn you down in 90 days. You could do it as a two-step process where you say, please indicate your intention to propose within 20 days. Or just, say, we've got 60 days for a proposal. The length of time depends on how much we ask for. And I know there's a tendency in these sorts of processes to want to rush. This has been talked about for a year or more since our current conversations. Does another 60 days make a big deal of difference to you? You're entering into a 90-year relationship. And in a lot of ways, it really is a perpetuity. If someone builds housing here in 90 years, you're not going to come in and say, okay, demolish it all, get rid of it. And I know we tend to say we don't want to sell the land, we want to keep hold of it, but realistically, do you want 90-year-old houses coming? If someone had done this in the 1920s and the lease was coming due, and you've now got 1920s vintage apartments, and someone came back to you and said, hey, church, lease is over. These are all yours now. You have to go collect the rent. You have to manage all the property questions. Oh, by the way, the building's pretty dilapidated. There's a lot of asbestos in it. do you really want these buildings back after 90 years? And we all think, yeah, but asbestos is so old fashioned. We've got it right these days, but we don't know what's going to be wrong in 90 years. So, there is a point. Go ahead.
Well, to Jeanette's question of RFPs, we can find lots of them online, but generally they'd be from government entities or, other property owners, not churches. Do you have examples of
we've got a couple
churches?
of, yeah, right. No, we've got a couple from churches. The main thing is it's really the basic principles of it are very simple. It's a question of can you articulate what you want from those developers? When you say, I want a proposal from you, what do you want from them?
Right. Well, that's what having some examples helps you to focus.
I'll I mean, the Napa one is pretty good. I'll see if I can pull that one forward at least and send that to you. And it'll just give you some ideas of, saying to them what the property is, what you know about the property, what you're looking for out of it. And the nice thing about RFPs is that it allows someone to come in and say, hey, this is what you asked for, but have I got a deal for you? If you let me do this, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are enough problems with the site that it's not going to be, people are not going to be doing surprising things for you, but who knows?
Well, are you aware? I mean, I've heard on KQED and seen a little bit online about churches in the East Bay organizing to build, housing that their senior members could move into rather than, moving to the valley when they retire. And so that would, with the publicly financed, government subsidized affordable housing, you can't discriminate by, allowing your members to have preference. Is that beginning to happen in any of the United Methodist churches? There's actually an organization that's been formed in the East Bay called, let me see, I just found it here online. It's like local initiative support corporation, a nonprofit community development that's set up to train religious leaders and connect them to developers and provide grants to get started in churches, with that specific goal of developing housing that would reduce the loss of members just because of the cost of housing is driving them to leave town.
Sure. So, I mean, to your point, once you move to any form of public funding,
right,
you cannot constrain it.
Right.
And the development entity needs to be not controlled by the church. That's where we've had trouble before, and I would suspect there would be a lot of resistance to it as an idea, is if you try to say, we as the church want to be on the board of directors for the property. Really, what you're doing is, well, again, these are choices you make, but my understanding of what you're trying to do more is you want to have this be arm's length.
Right. But the question I'm raising there is that we could have two objectives and they would require different kinds of developments. One would be, having a government subsidized affordable housing, which would have to be, non-discriminatory in the selection process. But, the other potential would be to use some of the land to produce housing that we could say the preference is for members of the church, or some process in which, it does directly serve people who are constituents of the church.
Yes. Then you'd be running into an issue of it being a subsidy from the church to those people. If
well, it all depends. I mean, but there is an organization in the East Bay. You apparently have not heard of this.
No.
Local initiatives group. There's a number of congregations that have together produce this organization that is non-sectarian. It's not in any one of the denominations that is taking on this issue of retaining aging church members by having an option for people to move into housing that's owned by that congregation.
And I know subsidy sounds pejorative, but if I've got a house that I could rent for $2,000 a month, and I rent it to you for $1,500 a month, I'm effectively
that's a gift.
Yeah.
And that has tax consequences, et cetera. But I mean, these are all known issues that
Sure.
there are people who know how to address them.
Well, it is. It's still a choice that the church is making, saying, I am choosing to rent to my
I'm
members.
not sure that these churches are making the decision that they're going to subsidize the housing. They're just going to create housing that is, due to location, et cetera, and design, is attractive to their members. They're not trying to do this as a subsidy.
Well, if they're keeping their people in the neighborhood by providing low-cost housing, they are subsidizing those people.
Well, not if all the houses are single family and they build some apartments. You take a place like Galt or someplace where there's not much multifamily housing. You have these suburban areas where there's not much multifamily, and just by creating multifamily, you've created an opportunity for your members. It doesn't have to be viewed in the standpoint that, we got to subsidize our members to get them to stay. No, we just need to provide them the kind of housing that works for them, because they don't want to rent another single family home.
No, and that's fine. As I say, if it's provided it's at fair market value.
Sure. And I think these issues are all being addressed, and that we don't have to deal with all of the issues. We need to look at what's being done in other parts of the Bay Area.
I think we're going off on a tangent here, David.
Well, but I think we do need to be clear what we want to accomplish with having housing developed. And it would be purely a ministry to the community to have government subsidized, that's open to anybody, non-discriminatory. You have no no affiliation affects people's qualification, and having the qualification that if you're a member of the church, you get preference in being accepted. Those are questions that I don't think we should ignore, that question exists.
So Samuel, you had a question.
Yes, I'm a little confused. I'm a lot confused. But the difference between the ENA that you spoke of and a letter of intent, based on the draft of a sample letter of intent that we have received from Christian Church Homes, it sounds like that would be the same process as an ENA. Is that not so?
It's going to have similar conditions to it. There is either an agreement or not an agreement, and the letter of intent is either a commitment or it sort of says, we're kind of interested. What an ENA does is it sort of formalizes the letter of intent into a contract. Often I'll say, contracts exist for when relationships fail. And so a letter of intent is nice until things start getting nasty and things start breaking down, and someone says, well, you said you intended to do it. And I said, I know I said I intended to do it, but that was based on you doing the following. Getting it written down in a contract is really a way of sort of formalizing that letter of intent into saying, we not only intend to do this, we actually agree to do this based on, you following these steps, us following those steps. So you're correct that the letter of intent, the ENA may not look terribly different from the letter of intent. But a contract will have, this contract is good for 12 months or whatever. These are the basis on which we can terminate. These are how and when we might make any payment. So you're right. An LOI and an ENA are very similar.
And so a letter of intent is not considered to be a contract?
It's ambiguous. You know, we use the term letter of intent to sound not like an agreement. Oh, I'm sending you a letter saying I intend to do this. Is it enforceable? It doesn't say. And so, as I say, I tend at this point to say, no, let's get clarity. And so I think to your point, David, in terms of these questions about more captive housing, these are the sorts of things to clean out before you put this out onto an RFP. So that, you know, you are saying, do we intend this to be market rate housing? It may be designed as, you know, apartments, predominantly single bedroom apartments that may be more suited to church seniors. It may even be an age restricted, because that's legal within the system to say, you know, it needs to be 55 and older. Those are all the sorts of things you can put into the considerations, but you don't really want to be haggling these things out later in the process.
You know, that was one of the points that Sydney brought up several times, is that the purpose of having a letter of intent is to get as many of the business points hashed out before you both decide that you want to marry the other person. I was a little surprised in getting this letter of intent because it really says nothing. There were no business points in this one. So I'm surprised that they both came from this, you know, in one hand there was a letter, in another hand there's an opinion of what a letter of intent is. But
Right. Well, there's 6 months between these. I think we would get probably a different draft if we were to ask Sydney now.
probably.
But she said he would do for us too. He
Yes.
did do that.
Right. And I just think it's useful for us to get as many of these examples so that we can start seeing what is or is not included in any given organization's starting point, you know. Because we certainly, in the meeting we had with Sydney Stone, how many times did you say, well, that's a business point?
Well, and
this is all negotiable, and we want to know what all the negotiables are from their standpoint, because some of them, things won't be negotiable. We'll do this, but that, and if you don't want that, then we aren't your people.
And to throw in another set of initials for you, one that's is a thing, the idea of what's called a BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And that's essentially, what's your walk away? And so occasionally we'll talk about a BATNA, which is the idea of saying, you know, if you enter into a ENA, there's an awful lot of stuff that's not resolved. There are a lot of business terms to be done as you move into the ENA, but you might want to say that, you know, as I say, that we want you to take the entire site. We don't mind if it's purchase or long-term ground lease, but we need you to take this property off our hands. We want to have a minimum of 80 dwelling units, 60 dwelling units. It has to have a minimum mix. I mean, if you're trying to do workforce housing, typically you want to have a larger number of multi-bedroom apartments. By far and away, the most profitable apartment is a single bedroom apartment. So developers will usually try not to do 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. So we might say that we expect there to be a minimum mix of 20% 3 bedroom, 30% 2 bedroom, and 50% single room. You know, I'm just picking numbers out of thin air, but those are not unusual mixes. We expect there to be no cost to the church. We expect to receive payments from this property at X dollars or whatever it is over the life of the, these are the sorts of things you would say, provided, and those would be in the initial step of the ENA, because you'd be saying, provided the finished deal looks something like this, then we're not going to, we'll worry about negotiating all of the other details as we go down the line. But these are our walkaway terms. That's our non-negotiable BATNA. If you don't, if you come back in and say, well, yeah, no, we said you could get 80 units, but turned out we could only get 30 on. We'd say, well, we'll consider it, but frankly, we can walk away out of this deal because you didn't give us what we thought we were going to get coming out of it.
And we haven't had this discussion of whether we want workforce or family housing. I mean, basically, CCH specializes in senior housing, not workforce housing. So, if we want, we haven't had this conversation as to whether affordable,
senior low income housing.
right?
Yeah, not just senior, but senior low income housing.
But there's also, as Peter was saying, we could also have workforce low income housing, et cetera. And we've not had that discussion. It's just that.
And there's such need for housing that providing senior housing is important as well as workforce housing, but it's a question of, what you're choosing. And by defining low income, is it going to be low income enough that they are able to get the various state tax credits? So in other words, it is contractually below market rate.
Yes.
Or is it just designed to be market rate, but by the nature of its product, less expensive market rate than the top of the line market rate? So those are, again, the sorts of issues that if you're saying it's senior low income, that is, they receive a public contribution towards from tax benefits or whatever, then again, you move into a different character of obligations.
Right.
And I think, Paul, at one point you said we were going off on a tangent. That is true, but also this is the point. This is almost your last chance, and you really need to go into all of these tangents. And part of it is discovering what could go wrong, or how someone can comply with the letter of the rule and still give you the wrong answer. Somehow that sounds a bit pharisaical, what do you do when someone is technically compliant but wrong? And so part of this process is really feeling your way out to all the little corners and saying, if this, then this, then this, oh, that's not what I want. Where do I pull this back from the edges? So this is the time to ask all those painful questions.
But we can do that, but at the same time, not try and build too big of a box to ask them to jump inside of, or else you're only going to make the pond smaller of people who are willing to talk to us.
And you could, I agree with you, that you could very quickly say, I really don't care if this is low income senior or low income workforce or low income whatever. We just want to make sure that this is serving the lower income communities within the region.
Mm-hmm.
So that can go into the I don't care bucket. But you almost, you need to go to the fence line and peer over the fence to decide is this something that really is important to me? So I'm not saying that you need to get lost in the details, but there are times you just have to burrow in a little bit to find out, is there something that underlying here that's worrying to me?
Right.
Well, and the other thing is though, that it was fairly clear from the Zoom that we had last week that, anywhere from 2, 3, 4 acres would make a viable project for the parameters that Christian Church Homes is generally working in. So that means that we could potentially do 2 different kinds of projects on the site and still not tear down the buildings that we already have built there. I mean, we have not explored all of the options yet. And if we're envisioning the future for the congregation, I think we haven't discussed it enough yet to be clear. And so it isn't like we need to make one big box and all this is going to happen with one decision.
So Peter, what I'm hearing, because part of why we were asking people to talk with us is so that we could get a feel for how much land that they would think would be the minimum amount, and how many households would they be able to house in that kind of land, and what are they looking at in terms of are they willing to do the work of getting that really does target the lowest income brackets, or they just kind of in this county a while back, they were talking about low income housing as $2,500 a month. And there was a huge outrage saying, that's not low income. That's a huge amount. If you're talking minimum wage people, that's their entire month's salary, So,
but the next step from that is that they can get vouchers. Right. But
okay, so what we were trying to get is a lot of different input so that we would be able to narrow stuff down. But if people aren't talking to us, how can we proceed to be able to really grasp what the potential is, and so that we can have reasonable conversations, not only with 3.0, but then take it to the congregation so that we can all agree, this is what we're looking at. This is what we really want. Because people said we want low income housing, but we didn't explore. Is it going to be only for seniors? Is it going to be for families? Is it going to be a mix of seniors and families? Is it going to be like the lowest income, or is it just going to be, slightly below market, or whatever we're really talking about? How is there some resource that we could study, that we could have a discussion? Because we were hoping these developers could help us answer, really understand the complexities a little bit better so that we could have informed conversations. So what resources might we be able to tap into to help us have these conversations if we're not able to draw this information from the developers?
Sure. So who else have you talked to, just out of interest?
Who have we tried to get a hold of?
Yeah.
Burbank Housing, Mid-Penn, EAH.
And have they just not replied, or did they say thanks but no thanks? Or
No, they don't have a live person at the other sitting in the office, and so you go into a phone tree, and I usually at least left a message asking for told them why I was calling, and asked for the person that would be the appropriate person to talk to us about, you're interested in buying land. Left my name and number, told them the acreage and the location. And I'm not done making phone calls, but I was just giving everybody an update the other day, kind of where we're at. I kind of see it as we were saying, let's give it one more try here with each of these. But yeah. I left messages. I left 2 messages, and I specifically asked for different people each time. Didn't get a call back. That didn't move the needle. Which I was
on 3 or 4 different organizations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, one thing that was coming to me out of that last dialogue there was that there is so much need in the community at the lowest end, at the senior end, at the housing homeless end, at the just below market rate. And, there's just such a shortage that if we do have trouble finding a group of people to go out to and say, what's your best shot on this land? Tell us what you can do for us and what you intend to build. It may be driven by who's responding. If we only have one or two people responding, we may end up going to the senior bucket with a CCH because they're the only ones that are responding, and that's okay, as far as I'm concerned, as long as it fits part of the community's need.
Right. No, I mean, if you only get a couple of offers, it's reasonable to go with those. I'm a little surprised and wonder what it might be that people are perceiving that is uncertain about this, because I mean, Burbank certainly was very keen to pursue Napa. I would have thought they were keen to pursue this one.
The guy who would have been pursuing it has left Burbank, and I don't know who they've hired to replace him. So
yeah, but I mean, they're still around. It's not as if that
right.
entire entity has gone away.
Correct.
I have another in there. A person I know is the new CFO. She hasn't started yet, but she's going to be there, I think, like next week. So I have a point person to start with to get introduced.
And to a certain extent, what we're trying to find out is if they're not interested, what is it that they're seeing that raises the questions?
Yeah.
What is the
fact that
status?
they've got their pipeline full.
Or yes, but I know CCH had a different financing mechanism. Finding funds to do low-income housing is challenging, I think, for a lot of developers. But this is still a decent enough site. It's likely to have some interest, and so it's one of those things that's troubling, is that there's a lack of response.
Mm-hmm.
What is the status at the moment with the endangered species, the animals, the salamanders?
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you about. Well, Sam can talk a little bit to this and the steps that we were thinking about taking, and you can help us to see if this is a good strategy. Sam, why don't you answer that question for us?
Well, a little background for Peter. As you know, there are two different jurisdictions here, the federal and the state fish and wildlife folks. We have recently received an exemption from the feds based on an old catch the salamander in the bucket survey that was done 20 years ago. And a couple of different interims, they have continued to honor that, and most recently did this last summer. So we're good with the federal government, but of course the tighter, more insistent body is the state fish and wildlife. And we've been talking to the city about what their role is, and if they would be inclined to approve a project, if there wasn't such a thing as salamanders, to what degree can they be a go-between between us and the state? They've indicated they, do have serious conversations when there's a disagreement. If the state's saying, no, we want mitigation, and the city's saying, well, let's talk. If in the end the state says, nope, we're going to require mitigation, that's the answer, that the state cannot that the city cannot overrule what the state says. But the city has been encouraging us to go ahead and do our full biological now. Because eventually somebody, we or the developer or whatever the letter of intent agrees to, will have to do that. And so we've been thinking that we will go ahead and do that study with a biologist with whom we have a relationship already. And whether we just put it on the table and hold on to it at this point, at least it will give us some additional information and to some degree, some peace of mind or reasons to wring our hands more. And that would be available for any developer then who goes to the city and to Fish and Wildlife on our behalf. So we're getting ready to have that biological done is the bottom line. Does that sound reasonable or?
Well, I'll add to that, Sam, that you and Paul and I met with one of the city planners, and she did say that, yeah, go ahead and get your biological done, but use a small firm. Don't use one of the big ones. I mean, what was your reading on that? Is you basically get a low profile study done, and then we can say it's been studied, but don't get one of the big firms that's going to potentially want to, keep refining or expanding their study. That's kind of how I took it, but
yeah, but I don't think that's the central question here at hand.
Right. Peter, do you think that our strategy to go ahead and have the study done, we found a source that's not particularly expensive to our way of thinking, a few $1,000s. Should we go ahead and have that study done now, or should we put that to the developers?
Usually that's something you would put to the developers because they're the ones who are going to be doing the entitlements on the site. If, on the other hand, that's what's putting the developers off, if there's word on the street that this is a really risky site, then getting the BO done could put that to rest. I mean, one of the three things is going to happen. You're going to find salamanders and know you're in deep trouble and the property's undevelopable.
That's not going to happen.
Or you're not going to find salamanders and you're going to be clear. Or it's going to be a little ambiguous and there's a bit, a little cluster over here and a little cluster over there. And so I think your expectation is that there are not salamanders on the site. I think, is that correct that you're?
Yes.
And in addition to that, the city has allowed first the construction company that was widening Stony Point Road, and second the Christmas tree operator. Now apparently the city didn't ever process the application that the Christmas tree operator put in this year. Last year apparently they did, but this year, I mean, basically the planner told us, well, she just let it sit on her desk and she never approved his application, but he went ahead and sold Christmas trees anyway. And I mean, that basically tells us that that's kind of how the city operates. They'll decide to not object and we'll be done, but.
Yeah, I guess it's a matter of whether doing this study at not a big cost also, it would seem to me, says to developers, we're serious about this. We're not just kind of playing around. And so, we encourage you to take a close look to see if you're interested in this project. And then, as Peter said, it could give the developer information that they wouldn't have at this point. They're not going to go out and do a biological during this first stage. I wouldn't.
No.
So Sam, what is have you got a hard number, $2,000 or $3,000?
$3,000.
Yeah.
Fran wanted to ask a question.
Fran's on the phone.
Oh, yes. Hi. Thank you. Yes, I did want to interject because I had an opportunity to talk to my son-in-law who works for River Partners and does have a background in environmental management. And he works with state biologists on the California CTS,
CTS,
right? California tiger salamander. And this person said this is probably, the best year to find salamanders right now, given all the heavy rains that we had. So, I mean, if we're doing an initial report, that's what's considered desktop, all the paperwork and the history of the property.
That's all done.
I say go ahead with that, but for anything on ground, like right now, it would be a major concern. So I'm just not sure of the timeline. I know we want to move ahead, but I did want to, I just had that conversation and wanted to share that, they may be around. Yeah.
yeah.
Of course, the biological wild salamanders is our most intense anxiety. That's not the only thing in biology. The biological, I mean, we're talking about fauna and floral and other
Red-legged tree frogs and what is it?
Exactly, burrowing owls, whatever. So
burrowing owls are pretty easy to deal with, but yes, you're right. But so I think, I mean, what my sense is here is there are a handful of steps I think I would recommend going forward. One is for you internally to do this, what is it you really want out of the site? And if you really are indifferent, that's an affirmative decision to be indifferent. To say, we really don't mind. We just want to provide, to use a much looser term, social justice housing. Be that, very low income, whatever. We want it to have no cost to the church. Then as you're doing that, I'd be inclined to say that you intend to issue a request for qualifications or letters of interest, expressions of interest, however you want to call it, lots of different ways of using the term. On, let's pick a date, June 30th, you're going to issue the letter with responses due 2 months after that, June 30th, September, July, August, September 1st. Something, and it doesn't need to be that long a period of time, but by saying June 30th, it gives you 6 weeks to really figure out what you want in that. That gives you something you can put out to the market so that, Paul, as you're having conversations with developers, you've now got something fairly definite to say, we've got this several acre property. It's a gorgeous property. It has a lot of opportunities. We will be issuing this on a certain date. You can then start, hyping it up, marketing it a little bit, because clearly what's happening is you're needing to market this to the community. Once you put that out, you really need to stay with your timetable pretty much. You can't then decide, we're going to push it out another month, another couple of months. What that will do is concentrate the minds of the developers, and you can even be saying, we intend to issue this. Are you interested in receiving it? Would you like to know more? Will you please respond within 7 days of the issuance of the RFP with your intention to respond? So what you're trying to do is put a little bit of solidity and a little bit of pressure behind the outreach. If by the time that's all gone out and you're still getting no interest, it's kind of telling you that maybe you just have to do the deal with the church housing place. But it's also a little unnerving if there's only one player who's interested in this. And we're talking about real estate in California. If there's only one person interested, there's maybe something telling you there's something very strange out there. These can't be the only people who've come up with this model. But if there is only one person and it's a deal that's acceptable to you, the chances are it's going to be acceptable to the cabinet. This also gives us a chance to get this onto the cabinet's agenda because they'll need to be looking at it. They don't have an official approval role, but trust me, you don't want them not on your side. From the Church Location and Building Committee, we are the ones who would be approving it, and we'd want to be seeing that you've gone through these various steps, that at least you're doing what you can to get the interest from the group. I know it seems a very slow process at times, but as I say, this is almost certainly nothing less than a 50-year deal, most likely a 90-year deal that you're going into.
So
Oh,
Peter,
that brings up the question, though. I would like some clarification on the discipline. Any copy of the discipline I've got is at least 25 years old. I hope it's available online, but the difference, my general understanding is that if you sell property, that's a capital item that's been sold, and that you're restricted in using it for capital expenditures. Maybe there's exemptions, etc. But if you rent property, well, that's current income, and you're not restricted to spending that only on capital. But does the discipline answer all the questions in that, or and is there wiggle room there that we need to know what the position of the cabinet and the conference have been on the lines that restrict the use of cash flow that could be generated?
Yep. So to answer that one in specifics, the way we have looked at that is that if it is essentially a capital lease, which is generally a lease over 5 years duration, you have to address how much of the capital value you're essentially monetizing on an annual basis. Because you could say, okay, well, what if I sold it, but I carried the mortgage and I'm really receiving mortgage payments, I'm not receiving capital payments, sort of thing. And
but the
so,
principal would be capital and the interest would be
right.
presumably
And so
not.
what we'd be saying is that when you do that as a long-term lease, is a portion of that rental income effectively part of the capital stack of the property? Generally, we're not looking at restricting it and saying, okay, if you've done a long-term lease, you can only use the income from that long-term lease as for capital expenditures. But it's also not just saying, okay, well, that's a pharisaical way of sort of scooting around the law, and that says I don't have to deal with that. So the discipline is not written to address this kind of development.
Right. That's what I would expect.
I mean, it says you really meant to come to us when you got final architectural drawings. Well, by the time you got final architectural drawings, it's too late for us to do anything about it. So we're really building this as we go along within the principles of the discipline, which is saying the point at which you are committing the church to significant expense related to a property transaction. And so that's why once you've put out the RFPs and you enter into this exclusive negotiation agreement, you're effectively saying to the developer that provided nothing goes wrong, we expect this to turn into a real deal. And so that's the point at which you're making a commitment. That's the point at which there would need to be an approval.
So there's no established method of, say, applying the current interest rate or interest rates average from some period of time or something and saying, okay, this will help us define what portion of that long-term lease is to be considered capital and what's to be considered ordinary income, or
there are ways of evaluating capital leases that are based on interest rates. So it's
and so what method has the conference used, or what what would the who would the cabinet ask to evaluate that, or what?
Yeah, usually at this point, with the developments that are moving forward, the income is sufficiently far downstream that it's not something that's of concern. You're not going to see cash out of this deal quickly. And we don't know what the structure of the deal will be. Will they give you a down payment? And so each one is really addressed on its own individual merits. There isn't an established mechanism. And we really are wanting to make sure we don't get into that sort of entanglement, because again, it's really
Well,
trying to
if you
decide.
understand it, you don't get into the entanglement. I mean, that's
Correct.
what
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And it's really a question of how much of this is on your ministry service already. And how much of it even is shared with other churches. There's a point at which, if you're monetizing a significant asset, it's how are you using that in the ministry of the church? And really not, I mean, the one thing that will really get a lot of trouble is if you're using that as an excuse not to raise funds. That if it's just sort of, oh, I happen to land this great thing, and it's a term that's often used as sort of the idea of zombie churches, and there have been churches which have got, parking revenue. They rent out their parking lot, and it means they can pay for their pastor and they don't have to have a congregation. And that's.
Did you happen to see 60 Minutes last night about the Mormon Church's investment fund?
No.
Well, that's an extreme case of $150 million. So.
No, it is. So anyway, Jenna, you were going to say some things.
I was wanting to know, like, at what point do I need to get, do I write the letter to like Shinya to say, hey, take this to the cabinet? Would I, one of the, like Thomas, who's chair of 3.0, that's what we call the group now, write the letter and say, this is, what's coming. Does it come from the trustee chair, because they're the ones who have to sign the documents? And at what point would we do that? Because I want to have things ready to roll so that we don't have the cabinet to meet all that often. If they're, so we want to have our deadlines match up to where it's be dovetail in with the others.
Yeah.
At what point the district committee need to be?
So those are able to be pretty informal. We know that you exist, so we don't need to be put on notice. Shinya knows that you exist. He doesn't need to be put on notice. I happened to be corresponding with him over the weekend on a different matter and said, oh, by the way, Santa Rosa's come back to life. So he's sort of aware of that. And not so much come back to life, but come back to the forefront. And so, because you've already been alive. And so really, what we need is tangible proposal. In a lot of ways, you're asking for permission to do something. We need to know, what is it you want to do? So if you were just, if you were just to be saying, thanks, Peter, for all this stuff, we just don't want to mess with that. We just want to have permission to sign a letter of intent with this particular developer you've got, whose name I keep forgetting. Then you could say, okay, here's my proposal. And we would then take that under consideration. We'd have a meeting. The chances are, it usually takes us about 1 to 2 months to go through the process, because we usually like to come out to the church, come and go walk on the property.
This is your committee, not the cabinet, right?
Committee, yeah.
Right.
But if it was something where we needed a decision in the next week, we'd call a meeting by video conference and we'd have our meeting. And so it's not something that should be holding you up. It's really, again, going back to the, what is it you want? Have you done the due diligence? What we'll be looking at is saying, do we believe that this is the best disposition? I'll get into my soapbox at this point. No, Jeanette, you sorry, but it's that sense of you have been given gifts of the saints, the land, the community, the property, the cash, all of those things are gifts that have been given to you by the saints who've gone before you. And your charge is to say, with what I have been given, how do I fulfill the ministry of the church? So it's a flipping it around from being a problem and, oh, I've got to deal with all this stuff. No, I've been given this gift, and I now have to discover what is the ministry that I personally am charged with respect to this gift. And some of us would rather not have had the gift because we didn't want to have the question. But it's that we've been given something. Again, you've heard me before on the hymn, all I have needed, thy hand has provided. We have what we need for the ministry in Santa Rosa. What we've got to discover is how to use what we've got to fulfill that need. And if we're feeling is, hey, God, you haven't given me enough stuff to do what you've told me to do, we obviously didn't understand the question. So it's really, we're looking and saying, do we believe that you have really explored what is your ministry with the gifts you've been given? So that you can then give the future gifts of your sainthood to the future generations.
Well,
So I know
you've raised a number of questions. I mean, the simplest one, though, it seems to me, Jeanette Peters is correct. That basically, if we communicate with the district committee on property and church location, they can communicate on our behalf with the cabinet, right? And
yeah, I mean, we usually do that with the cabinet. Chinya's on the cabinet, so
right.
It's not some terrifying process. It's just really we want to say we're charged with doing that due diligence work on observing your due diligence, and we then report up to the cabinet and say, do you have any concerns about this? Is there anything you know that we don't know? They may be planning some new mega church in Roanoke Park, and they say, okay, I don't really want to have anything to do with Santa Rosa anymore. We're going to close it all down. I'm playing games there, but they are the ones
that's
charged.
a reason for us to be in direct communication, because we don't want surprises coming out indirectly from the cabinet. But let me ask another question. I mean, you made a comment about how, well, maybe the cabinet thinks you should use proceeds that you get from this property for other churches. Now, that's the first time I've heard that topic raised, that maybe the cabinet would like us to send money to other churches in the Sonoma circuit or something.
It's all about what is the circuit regional district ministry. And I don't think there's going to be any question about this. So you should send money off to other places by any means. But what the cabinet's charge, and to some degree our district charge is how is this serving the ministry of the church? The church, universal and triumphant, the church that is beyond individual congregations. That can get a little bit squishy, so we tend to sort of think, oh yeah, let's look big. Okay, let's what can I do today? But it's still raising that question of, I know when Stony Point was bought, its intention was to become something of a service to the broader region. Brilliant idea, didn't quite work out. And so how do we honor those gifts and use it in the service that it really should be in that ministry? So I think of this as being a little bit like a porpoise. There are times when you're sort of sailing out of the water, looking at the world around you, and you've got all this wonderful vision and everything like that. And then you plunge into the depths and you're working out, well, what rental rate do I really care about? And you're really grubbing around all these little details. And then every so often you come up and you're doing this big visioning. And so it's this oscillating between the two, and both are important. So I hope I haven't increased the confusion at this point. I think it's now if any message, it's time to start getting this down on paper and making it real.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Peter?
You're on mute, David.
No, I do not.
Okay.
David, you're still muted.
But
Oh, sorry,
Oh.
sorry. Yes, I am.
I'm
muted.
fine.
But Peter, basically, you've brought back the whole historic context and I've been a member for 35 years. Fran, I think you were here when I came, and Sam had been here and left and has since come back. But the original vision when this property was acquired was the plan for a regional church. You know, we needed a bigger property to be able to make a larger facility that could be an umbrella under which many different groups could exist as part of a regional congregation. And then we went to the compromise of one church in two locations. And now we've kind of gotten to the point of one church in one location with this arm out here that we're trying to decide what to do with. And so if you bring it up as to the saints, the saints who were contributing, a lot of them are gone now, but some of us are still here. In that regional church concept was the original, and we have not discussed that much in recent time, obviously.
Right, do we have any other questions of Peter at this time?
I'm
Okay, so
good. I appreciate your time, Peter.
Oh, no problem.
I'm going to invite Peter. I'm going to invite the rest of you to stay on the call just a few minutes after Peter. That's good. I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
That's okay. I will leave you to have your discussion and say all those things of why did we ask him all those questions? I don't want it. I didn't want the answers I got. So anyway, I will leave at this point.
But do we
Thank
know
you.
the whole membership of the district committee? I mean, how many people are on the district committee?
Yes, we know, David.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And also actually one of the things, one of the members is up in your area, and what we've been looking at is having a local member to be able to come and walk with you. And so this will be Richard, who we sort of getting a bit of feedback there, but anyway, but really identifying that as you go through the process, he'll be a local resource able to connect with you. So now that this is sort of back up on the burner, we'll get Richard connected with you as well anyway. So, but that's our goal, is to work with you as you go forward. So anyway, I will leave the call. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
What last name?
Richard Hillary.
Okay.
He's down Roanoke Park, one of those.
Okay. I think I might have met him. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's a good chance you have. He's a great guy. So, okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, I just wanted us to take a moment to talk with each other about what we want to do then. What is our next steps in our 3.0? What is our little portion here? What will we do next? Because Paul's getting ready to leave for a couple of weeks. And I think that Peter's suggestion that we try to figure things out and see if we could get a request for proposal by the end of June or so, where we could say, let us know within a week if you're planning to submit one. That really can help move things ahead, I feel. But do we have enough time in June to work out what it is that we're asking people? What's essential, what's important, what's negotiable, what we don't really care about, what's not important. Yeah, Paul, you want to say something, or are you just twirling your pen?
I'm just twirling my pen.
Okay.
Somehow I think we need to address the question of whether we want to ask the questions, the kind that David's been raising here. maybe a conversation where we list out some of the things that we think we haven't talked about a lot and decide among ourselves whether we need to pursue those now or go ahead and get started on
Right.
the letter of intent.
So should we, as the group that's been dealing with this portion of it, should we make a recommendation to have a 3.0 meeting, say the second week of June, so that Paul can get back, and then we have, during that first week, we get together and list out all the questions that we really want to start discussing, and then bring the whole committee together to strategize about what would be the best tack to do that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, because if we have some differences of opinion, either direction or, do we want to give a lot of latitude to these RFPs to do their thing, or do we really want to narrow it down for them? We should kind of hash that out, I think.
Well, it's kind of
before we-
narrow or broaden, because really Christian Church Homes is basically saying they do senior affordable housing. They don't do family affordable housing or workforce or whatever you want to call. And
I think we need to clarify that. I think there's some feeling that they haven't been exclusively senior housing, but we don't know.
that's kind of what we've been saying, right? But
Yeah.
it's because we didn't ask the question.
Yeah.
okay, so,
I think that's a good idea.
so we'll schedule a meeting for our subgroup here. Anybody wants to have this for the first week of June, and ask Thomas to schedule a whole group meeting for the second week of June, that we can all really, as a 3.0 team, we'll bring a proposal and then we'll really hash it out together. And then we'll have a plan to move forward, whether we're, because part of what I want to know is, like you were saying, Paul, do we just put the RFPs out there fairly broadly and see what people bring back, and then from that decide what seems to be really pressing to us? Or do we say, no, this is what our vision is? Are you interested in that vision? Make it more narrow. And because if we want to make things narrow, there's a lot of questions, like what really would be the market value? What would we anticipate would be the difference between having family versus seniors versus, working with unhoused population? What really are we talking about in terms of the church's ability to actually be involved and engaged with the people, making disciples? What would be the financial ramifications of working with the different programs and different groups? Those kind of things. I think that will take a lot of, to me, it seems like that would take a lot of research. And some of that could be answered through people's responses to the RFPs, right? So on the one side, but on the other side, is it disingenuous to ask people for RFPs so that they're kind of doing our homework and then going, oh no, that's not going to work, or whatever, right? So I don't know so I'm thinking in June, we'll look at that and we'll come up with a plan and then talk with the whole group about it the second week.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Peter did kind of answer the question. He said that the most lucrative housing is, studios and one bedrooms. And in general, the developers are trying to avoid multifamily because it costs more. And you get fewer units, because they're bigger units, right? And
Right, but that's not the only thing to balance. Okay, so we're
that's
not
right.
going to,
That's right.
David, what I'm
That's
wanting to
right.
know now is, when can we get together in June?
Mhm.
Let's,
Okay, so Paul is the traveler.
so I'm looking at the week of, the week that starts with Sunday, the 4th.
Yeah.
Jeanette, I'm going to be out of town, but
Oh.
actually out of the country too.
I-
But you know what? I want this to go forward, and then I know like April will be back and Andrea will be back, and we can't wait for any one person for these discussions. So I do think the RFP is like critical, and I really, listened when Peter said, "What, really, just one? You have 7 acres in Santa Rosa, right?" So even if we're, depending on how much we drill down, or we have this, more formal document than calling people and saying, and here's the deadline and we're moving forward. But I agree, we need a lot of our internal discussion to hone that down. So, but
When do you leave, Fran?
I'm leaving June 1st. Yeah,
Okay.
for 3 weeks. So
So Paul gets back and you take off.
yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
It's okay. There'll be other people back, and yeah, maybe it's important to pull in all of 3.0. And I'm glad you recorded this. This is important information.
I probably ought to stop that recording, huh?
How long are you gone? Fran?
It's 3 weeks. I'm not back till the 21st. So sorry about that.